The Magic of Clumsy Wizards by Jack Rivers. Chapter 1: The Great Bouncing Disaster. It was a perfectly ordinary day in the town of Thistlewood. The sun shone brightly over cobbled streets, birds chirped cheerfully from the rooftops, and the smell of freshly baked bread wafted through the air. But all of that would change in an instant, thanks to a single unfortunate spell. In the heart of the town stood a large, crooked tower known as the Wizard's Keep. Inside, a young wizard named Oliver Wobblebottom was busily preparing for his very first solo spell. At 22 years old, Oliver had been studying magic at the prestigious Academy of Mystical Arts for as long as he could remember, but this was the first time he would be practicing magic outside of the safety of a classroom. And naturally, things were bound to go wrong. Oliver had always been a little clumsy. His robes were always slightly askew, his wand rarely pointed in the right direction, and he had a tendency to trip over his own feet, sometimes without even trying. It was a wonder he had made it this far as a wizard. But today was different. Today, he had big plans. "I'm going to cast the perfect spell," Oliver muttered to himself, staring at the dusty tome in his hands. It was titled Advanced Transmutation for Young Wizards, Mastering the Basics. He'd been studying the book for weeks, carefully memorizing every incantation, every hand gesture. Today, he was going to transmute something simple, like a pebble, into a small, bouncy ball. Nothing too complicated, but enough to prove to his fellow wizards that he was ready for the big leagues. With a deep breath, Oliver held his wand high and shouted, "Bonsetto's Magnifico!" The words echoed through the tower. There was a small puff of smoke, followed by a high-pitched boing. Oliver blinked, confused. That was not the sound a pebble should make when transmuted. Before he could even process what had happened, the ground beneath him began to rumble. The walls of the tower groaned and cracked. Suddenly, with a force that sent Oliver sprawling across the floor, the entire town of Thistlewood began to shake. The sky flickered and pulsed with an electric glow, and an odd, rubbery smell filled the air. "Oh," Oliver whispered, his heart sinking. Outside the window, a terrifying sight greeted him. The entire town, every building, tree, and lamppost was now bouncing, as if the very earth had become one gigantic rubber ball. People were flung into the air, their shouts and screams echoing in the distance as they bounced helplessly like toys. "Wobblebottom, what have you done now?" a familiar voice shouted. Oliver scrambled to his feet and turned around to find his best friend standing in the doorway, their faces twisted in confusion and disbelief. There was Cassandra Flimflam, a bright and clever witch who always seemed to have her nose stuck in a book. Her glasses were askew, and her usually neat hair was flying in all directions from the force of the bounce. Next to her stood Gregor Splat McBumble, a burly wizard who had a knack for summoning things, most of the time by accident. He was currently hanging from a chandelier, his arms flailing as he tried to regain his balance. "Wobblebottom," Cassandra repeated, crossing her arms and raising an eyebrow. "Did you just cast a spell to turn the entire town into a bouncy ball?" Oliver gulped, his cheeks turning red. It was supposed to be a simple transmutation spell. I just wanted to make a little rubber ball, a practice spell." "By turning the town into a bouncy ball?" Gregor asked, his voice thick with sarcasm. He dropped to the ground with a splat, bouncing slightly before standing up. "What kind of wizard are you, Wobblebottom?" "I swear, this wasn't what I meant to do," Oliver exclaimed. I may have misread the spell instructions. It's supposed to be a harmless little transformation. Instead, I turned the whole town into this." Cassandra's eyes narrowed as she looked out the window. Thistlewood's houses were now bouncing up and down, their chimneys tipping over and their roofs flapping like they were made of rubber. The townsfolk, now bouncing uncontrollably, were trying in vain to hold on to anything that could keep them grounded. It was a total disaster. Well, that's one way to get everyone's attention, Gregor said, rubbing his sore bottom as he glanced at the chaos. This is bad, wobble bottom, Cassandra said with a worried expression. The spell is out of control. If we don't reverse it, the whole town could bounce right off the edge of the world. And the last thing we need is for Thistlewood to go bouncing out of existence. Oliver's face paled. He had made many mistakes in his magical career, but this was by far his biggest. I'll fix it, I promise, Oliver said with determination. I just need to figure out how to reverse the spell. Gregor groaned and stood up, brushing himself off. And how exactly are we supposed to do that? Cassandra's voice was calm, but serious. We need to find the source of the spell and reverse it before the whole town is sent flying into the sky. And I'm pretty sure someone has to come up with a better plan than winging it. Right, Oliver said, straightening up. No more mistakes. We'll fix this, I swear. Just, after we figure out how. As the three friends set off toward the center of the bouncing town, they knew one thing for certain. This would be one clumsy adventure, but they had no choice but to see it through. The fate of Thistlewood depended on it. Chapter 2, A Bouncy Plan. The entire town of Thistlewood was in chaos. Oliver stood frozen, staring out of the window as houses, trees, and people bounced in unison, like an entire town built from rubber. The cobblestone streets had turned into a giant trampoline. At one point, a whole group of children had been launched into the air, their shrill laughter echoing as they bounced high above the rooftops. Meanwhile, Cassandra Flimflam and Gregor Splat McBumble were rummaging through Oliver's wizarding books and magic tools. They were desperately trying to figure out how to reverse the spell, but Oliver was too distracted by the disaster outside. We can't let Thistlewood bounce into oblivion, Oliver muttered to himself, pacing back and forth. He reached for his spell book, but it fell to the floor with a loud thud. Do you even know how to reverse this? Cassandra called from across the room, her glasses perched at the very tip of her nose as she flipped through the pages of a dusty tome. This spell is unlike anything I've seen. I know, Oliver said, rubbing his forehead. I can't believe I messed up this badly. I meant to transform a pebble, not the entire town. Yeah, well, now we have a bouncing town on our hands, Gregor grumbled, still trying to untangle himself from the chandelier he'd gotten stuck in. If I have to bounce anymore, I'm going to be bouncing out of here. Oliver turned to them, determination in his eyes. We need to figure out where the spell went wrong. There must be a clue. Clue? Cassandra raised an eyebrow. You want to find a clue while everyone is bouncing around like pinballs? Gregor nodded dramatically. We're just going to sit here, thinking while the town goes on an endless trampoline ride? Sounds genius. Oliver sighed. I know this sounds ridiculous, but there has to be a way to fix this. I'm going to start by retracing my steps. Maybe we can isolate what went wrong. Cassandra shook her head, but smiled. You know, Oliver, you're the only wizard I know who can turn a simple spell into a disaster. But fine, lead the way. The trio began making their way out of the tower and into the chaotic streets of Thistlewood. Oliver stumbled slightly as he stepped out of the door, his feet bouncing along with the rest of the town's lively rhythm. This is going to take some getting used to, Gregor said, his voice muffled as he bounced past them and landed on top of a barrel. It's like trying to walk on a trampoline made of jelly. Yeah, and the jelly's bouncing, Cassandra muttered, adjusting her glasses. We've got to figure this out fast. The more time we waste, the more likely we are to end up in space. Oliver nodded. Right. We need to find the epicenter of the spell. If we can isolate the point where it all started, maybe we can reverse it. But how do we know where the spell started? Gregor asked. The whole town is bouncing. There's no epicenter. It's everywhere. Oliver tapped his chin thoughtfully. You're right. We can't just walk around hoping we'll stumble upon it. We need something more precise. Like magic? Cassandra asked, flipping through a different book she'd picked up from Oliver's shelves. Exactly, Oliver said, his eyes lighting up. If we can use a locator spell, we can track down the source of the magic. Maybe it's not the whole town that's enchanted. Maybe the spell is focused on something smaller, like the heart of the town, or a specific object. Like the mayor's hat? Gregor suggested with a grin. He always wears it way too high. That thing must be magical. I doubt it's the mayor's hat, Cassandra muttered, flicking through the pages of her book again. But, it might be a good idea to check with him anyway. He always seems to be at the center of the chaos. Oliver nodded, though his face was drawn with concentration. We'll check the mayor first. If nothing's there, we'll move on. But the locator spell should help us narrow things down. The group set off toward the town square, where the mayor's tall, wobbly tower of a building loomed. The bouncing was especially intense here, and they had to hold on to lampposts to avoid being flung into the air. Why did I ever think being a wizard was a good idea? Gregor grumbled, his feet never touching the ground for more than a second as he drifted like a balloon. This is just one big magic mess. Just think of it as practice for your next big adventure, Cassandra teased, managing to keep her balance better than the others. If you survive this, you'll be ready for anything. Finally, they reached the mayor's tower. The mayor, as expected, was standing on his balcony, waving at the townspeople who were bouncing past. Mayor Applewhip, Oliver shouted, trying to get his attention. We need your help. The town is bouncing, and we need to stop it before... Before Oliver could finish, the mayor gave a hearty laugh, completely unfazed by the bouncing. Goodness, I thought I'd lost my own bounce back in my youth, but look at us now. What a fine day for a hop, wouldn't you agree? Oliver stammered, trying to keep his feet on the ground. No, Mayor, this is not fun. It's a magical disaster. The mayor raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. Oh, a disaster, you say? Well, if it's magic, you'd best speak to old Master Wobblebottom. He's always causing a ruckus with his spells. Oliver froze, the words sinking in. Wait, did you say Wobblebottom? Indeed, the mayor chuckled. His magic has always been a bit unpredictable. You should visit him. He'll sort you out. Oliver exchanged a look with Cassandra and Gregor. It seemed their search for the cause of the spell had just become a lot more personal. Well, I guess we're off to see Wobblebottom, Oliver said, his voice filled with resolve. Let's hope he knows how to fix this mess. Chapter 3, Wobblebottom's Wild Wonders. The town of Thistlewood bounced, jiggled, and wobbled like a giant rubber ball. Every building, every street, every sign, everything had been affected by Oliver's clumsy spell. The town now felt like a carnival ride gone terribly wrong. People were laughing, shouting, and occasionally shrieking as they sailed past. Some even turned into human cannonballs, careening off walls or bouncing into each other. It was all chaotic, but somehow amusing and a little bit terrifying. Oliver, Cassandra, and Gregor struggled to keep their feet on the ground as they made their way to the home of Master Wobblebottom. As they bounced and rolled down the wobbly streets, Gregor had the distinct feeling that no one in town was as worried as they should be. In fact, people seemed to be having the time of their lives. A group of children had even started a game of bounce tag, giggling as they careened off trees and houses, using the bounciness to their advantage. Why are we in such a rush? Gregor asked, laughing as he bounced uncontrollably toward a fountain. Everyone seems to be enjoying the new Rubber Town vibe. I could get used to this. Because it's not supposed to be this way, Oliver shouted, barely able to keep up. We need to reverse this before it goes too far. The whole town could end up bouncing into another dimension. Cassandra sighed, pushing her glasses back up the bridge of her nose as she bounced awkwardly alongside them. You do realize we might already be in another dimension, right? This spell has certainly messed with the fabric of reality, if you ask me. I know, Oliver groaned. That's why we need to get to Wobblebottom. He's the only one who can undo this madness. After several more bounces, they finally reached the outskirts of the town, where Master Wobblebottom's house stood on the edge of the forest. His magical cottage was known to be eccentric, to say the least. It had a crooked chimney, a door that swung open and shut on its own, and a garden that looked like it was from another world, one where plants could talk and sometimes even dance. Wobblebottom, Gregor called out as he landed in front of the house. Come out and fix this mess, old man. You got a bouncing town to save. Master Wobblebottom appeared in the doorway almost immediately, his long white beard bouncing with each step. He wore a mismatched robe and a large floppy hat that seemed too big for his head. The moment he saw Oliver, Cassandra, and Gregor, he gave a warm, toothless smile. Well, what do we have here? He cackled. The bouncing town of Thistlewood. This takes me back to my younger days, much younger days, mind you, when I made a mistake with a bouncing potion and ended up with a bouncing village, not just a town. Ah, those were the days. Wobblebottom, we need your help, Oliver said, his voice full of urgency. My spell went terribly wrong, and now the whole town is bouncing uncontrollably. Can you undo it? The wizard scratched his chin thoughtfully, as though he were contemplating a particularly difficult riddle. A bouncing spell, you say? That's quite the predicament. But I must admit, I do enjoy a bit of chaos now and then. I've had my fair share of magical accidents. Why, once I turned an entire crop of carrots into bouncy balls. That was a tricky situation. Carrots bouncing everywhere. Took me 3 weeks to gather them up again. We don't have 3 weeks, Cassandra snapped, growing impatient as she bounced in place. Can you just help us, Wobblebottom? The town could end up bouncing away. Master Wobblebottom blinked. Oh, well, that is a problem, isn't it? I suppose we should fix this before it bounces away to the moon or something. He stroked his beard again, clearly enjoying the thought. I'll tell you what, we can fix this, but it'll take a bit of imagination. I'm listening, Oliver said, trying to suppress the panic bubbling up inside him. Well, Wobblebottom continued, you've got the magic to reverse it already. You just need the right mindset. A little bit of creative thinking will do wonders. The trick is not just reversing the spell, it's turning it into something less bouncy. Right, Cassandra said, rolling her eyes. And how exactly do we do that? Well, you see, you have to imagine a world where the bounce isn't so overwhelming. Instead of focusing on making everything stop, you need to think about making it less bouncy. It's a bit like trying to tame a wild beast by soothing it rather than restraining it. Gregor raised an eyebrow. So, you're saying we need to calm the town down? Precisely. Wobblebottom grinned. Calm the bounce, not stop it. Once you've done that, the magic will realign itself. But you need to be in the right frame of mind. Trust the magic. Believe in its power to adapt. And, of course, be a little bit patient. Oliver looked skeptical, but he was willing to try anything at this point. Okay, so how do we start? Wobblebottom grabbed a strange-looking crystal from his robe pocket and handed it to Oliver. The crystal shimmered with a soft glow, almost as if it were breathing. This, Wobblebottom explained, is a focus crystal. Hold it, close your eyes, and visualize the town not as a bouncy blob of rubber, but as a peaceful, gently swaying place. Think of how it could be, soft but stable. Let the magic find its way back to its natural rhythm. Easier said than done, Gregor muttered, his feet still bouncing uncontrollably, though he tried to stand still. I'm not exactly the calm and peaceful type. Neither am I, Oliver admitted, but we have no choice. With a deep breath, Oliver held the focus crystal tightly in his hands, closed his eyes, and began to concentrate. He imagined the town peaceful, serene, with gentle movements instead of violent bounces. He thought about the trees, the houses, and the people, all moving gracefully in a harmonious dance. Come on, he whispered under his breath. Just a little less bounce, please. There was a sudden hum in the air, and for a brief moment, everything went still. The world around them was quiet, unnervingly quiet, before a soft, rhythmic bounce began to take place. It wasn't chaotic or wild. Instead, it was gentle, almost like the town was rocking itself to sleep. Whoa, would you look at that? Wobblebottom chuckled. It worked. The town slowly returning to a balanced state. You've done it, Oliver. Oliver opened his eyes, surprised to find that the bouncing had indeed become more controlled. People were still bouncing, but now they moved with a gentle rhythm, as if the town itself was breathing in and out. It was no longer a wild, uncontrollable frenzy. Wobblebottom, you're a genius, Oliver exclaimed. I know, Wobblebottom replied with a wink. Now remember this lesson, Oliver. Magic is not just about force and power. Sometimes it's about understanding balance. Got it, Oliver said, a grin spreading across his face. The three friends watched as the town slowly began to settle down, its bounces becoming lighter and more peaceful. They had done it. The day had been saved, all thanks to a little imagination and a lot of clumsy magic. Chapter 4, The Jellybean Jinx. With the town of Thistlewood slowly settling down into a more manageable bounce, Oliver, Cassandra, and Gregor felt a sense of relief wash over them. The ground, which had once been a springy trampoline of chaos, now felt like a gentle cushion beneath their feet. People still wobbled about, but it was no longer a frantic, high-flying circus act. They were no longer at risk of bouncing into the sky, at least. Oliver sighed with satisfaction. Well, it's not perfect, but it's definitely an improvement. Agreed, Cassandra said, adjusting her glasses as she floated gently to the ground from a particularly high bounce. Though I'm not sure how much longer we can keep it like this. It's just a matter of time before... A loud pop sounded above them, followed by a series of smaller pops that seemed to echo through the streets. People began to glance around, puzzled. A few more pops sounded off in rapid succession until, bam! The air around them shimmered, and suddenly the entire town was enveloped in a sticky, sugary cloud. The streets began to look strangely colorful, and to their horror, what had been a peaceful, bouncing town now appeared to be turning into a sticky, wobbling carnival. Oh no, Oliver groaned. Not again. Before them appeared the town's new, unintended affect, a spectacular explosion of rainbow-colored jelly beans that rained from the sky like some kind of magical confetti. Jelly beans landed on the ground with soft, squishy thuds, bouncing lightly just like everything else. But as the jelly beans hit the ground, they didn't just bounce away, they stuck. People who tried to move got stuck to the jelly beans like flypaper. One man tried to escape, only to find his feet glued to a pile of jelly beans, his arms flailing wildly as he was dragged back into the sticky mess. Oliver, Gregor said wide-eyed, I don't think this is helping. This town's about to turn into one giant jelly bean disaster. This wasn't me, Oliver shouted, hands raised in innocence. I didn't do it this time. I think my spell must have multiplied. First it was bouncing, and now it's turned into some sort of jelly bean jinx. This is why you don't trust magic. Cassandra muttered as she tried to peel a jelly bean off her leg. Every time you try to fix one thing, it breaks something else. We need to fix it before this turns into an even stickier situation, Oliver said, eyes wide with worry. He glanced around frantically. Where's Wobblebottom? He must know what to do. Master Wobblebottom, as if summoned by the sheer force of Oliver's panic, appeared in front of them with an exaggerated whoosh. He was floating slightly above the ground, his robes billowing as though he had just stepped out of a very whimsical windstorm. Ah, I see you've discovered the jelly bean, Jinx. Wobblebottom chuckled with an almost too wild gleam in his eyes. It's a classic. Happens all the time when you're experimenting with spells that involve motion. Very common mistake. You know, once I turned an entire river into licorice. Now that was a sticky mess. Not the time for your stories, Wobblebottom, Gregor snapped, trying to pull his foot from the jelly bean-covered ground. We need help now. Yes, yes, of course, my young wizards, Wobblebottom said, his tone suddenly more serious. The key to reversing this jelly bean calamity is simple. Reverse the momentum of the spell. Reverse the what? Cassandra frowned, still trying to free her hand from a pile of jelly beans. What are you talking about? You see, Wobblebottom said with an exaggerated hand gesture. Whenever magic involves momentum, it tends to keep building. It's like a catapult. One small motion leads to a bigger reaction. In your case, it started with bouncing, then turned into jelly beans. Now you need to reverse the momentum, or else it'll keep getting bigger until the whole town is filled with more jelly beans than you could eat in a lifetime. So we just stop the bouncing? Oliver asked, trying to make sense of the wizard's explanation. Exactly. But rather than trying to undo the jelly beans themselves, we need to change the direction of the spell, bring it back to its original purpose. Instead of bouncing town, you need a bouncing solution. And how do we do that? Gregor asked, still stuck to the ground by the sticky, colorful bean. You need a counterbalance, Wobblebottom explained, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. A spell that can reset the direction of the magic. Something that can neutralize the force of the jelly bean magic. Ah, yes, I've got it. With a dramatic flourish, Wobblebottom raised his wand high, and for the first time since they'd met him, his face became serious. The key to a successful counterbalance spell is something smooth and sticky, like jelly beans, of course. Cassandra groaned. Wait, you're going to use more jelly beans to fix this? Precisely. Wobblebottom grinned, his face lighting up. But this time, we'll use the magic of jelly bean harmony. If we align the right flavor with the right color, the spell will revert to its peaceful state, and the jelly beans will become completely harmless, delicious, in fact. All right, Gregor said, flapping his arms as if to shake the jelly bean residue off. Let's just get to it before the town becomes one giant gumdrop. The wizard tapped his wand against the jelly beans on the ground, muttering an incantation so strange that it seemed to make the air buzz. To their surprise, the jelly beans began to glow brightly. A soft hum filled the air, and for a moment, everything went still. The candy-coated chaos was frozen in time. Now focus on the harmony, Wobblebottom instructed, a mischievous twinkle in his eye. Imagine the jelly beans aligning, becoming soft and smooth instead of chaotic and bouncy. Think of them as peaceful candy soldiers marching in the same direction. Oliver closed his eyes and concentrated. He could feel the magic in the air, swirling like a sweet breeze. He focused, picturing each jelly bean settling into a gentle, perfect pattern. No more bouncing, no more chaos. Just the peaceful motion of candy meeting the ground. Suddenly, a ripple of energy shot through the air, and the jelly beans began to melt into harmless puddles of sugar. The entire town shimmered for a moment as the magic reset itself. Then, with a final pop, everything stopped. The town, now returned to its non-bouncy state, was eerily quiet. People began to step carefully from their jelly bean puddles, inspecting the sticky aftermath with curiosity rather than panic. Well, that was an adventure, Oliver said with a sigh of relief, watching the last jelly bean puddle evaporate. An adventure that didn't involve jelly beans sticking to every surface, Cassandra added, wiping her hands on her robe. Exactly, Gregor agreed, eyeing Wobblebottom. But how do we make sure this doesn't happen again? Ah, young wizards, Wobblebottom said, his tone full of wisdom. You'll never learn unless you get your hands a little sticky. Just remember, magic has its own way of bouncing back. Sometimes you just have to be a bit bouncier than it. The trio shared a long, tired, but relieved look. The town was saved. For now. Chapter 5. The Squiggly Spell. The streets of Thistlewood were finally clear of jelly beans, but the echoes of their sticky invasion lingered in the air like a half-remembered dream. The citizens were cautiously testing their newfound freedom, walking gingerly as though they expected the ground to turn into a pile of chewing gum at any moment. While the town had returned to its original state of normal, Oliver, Cassandra, and Gregor couldn't shake the feeling that something else was still off. Master Wobblebottom floated above them, his expression one of quiet contemplation as he absently twirled his wand in the air. His robes billowed dramatically in a non-existent wind, which, though impressive, only made Oliver more suspicious. Wobblebottom's brand of help had gotten them into a sticky situation before. Okay, I'll admit, Cassandra said, adjusting her glasses. That jelly bean fiasco wasn't the best, but it worked. We fixed the bouncing town problem. Now can we just get a little peace and quiet for like 5 minutes? Gregor nodded vigorously. Yes, please. I think I've had enough magic mishaps for one lifetime. Wobblebottom chuckled, a sound that seemed to come from the bottom of a very mischievous well. Ah, but you see, young wizard's peace is fleeting. Magic is always unpredictable. Don't say that, Oliver groaned. I don't want to hear it. No. You misunderstand, Wobblebottom said with a smile. You've only begun to scratch the surface of what the magic world has in store for you. You can't just wave a wand and expect everything to go back to normal, especially when it's a magic that's as untamed as yours. My magic? Oliver blinked, feeling a little defensive. What do you mean? Well, you see, Oliver, Wobblebottom explained, you're not just any wizard. You have what we call mischief magic. Mischief magic? Is that a real thing? Cassandra asked, raising an eyebrow. Oh, yes, Wobblebottom nodded with a grin. Mischief magic is a very rare and unpredictable form of magic. It's based on whimsy, chance, and most importantly, fun. It's often uncontrollable, and it tends to have the most creative results. Oliver looked at him, unsure whether to be flattered or terrified. So, basically, I'm an accident waiting to happen? Wobblebottom laughed heartily. Not an accident, my dear boy, but rather a masterpiece in the making. You're a natural. Now, let's see what else we can create. Oliver stared at the wizard with wide eyes. What? No more creating! I can't! But before he could protest further, Wobblebottom's wand was already raised, a mischievous spark flickering at its tip. Cassandra groaned. Wobblebottom, don't. We just fixed everything. It'll be fine. Trust me, the wizard said with a grin that had disaster written all over it. And before anyone could stop him, Wobblebottom flicked his wand. A spark shot out of the tip, landing in the middle of the street with a little pop. Immediately, the air around them shimmered. The ground beneath their feet began to rumble, and a loud, twisting sound filled the air. Suddenly, the pavement began to twist and contort like a squiggly line drawn by a very excited toddler. The cobblestones, which had been perfectly arranged, now bubbled up like they were made of rubber, stretching and wriggling as if alive. They slithered like a snake, changing direction, bouncing and twisting underfoot. The once straight roads now looked like an abstract maze of squiggles and loops. Wobble bottom! Oliver shouted, nearly tripping over one of the rolling cobblestones. What did you do this time? Well, I didn't quite anticipate this much. Wiggle, Wobblebot admitted with an apologetic grin. You wiggled the pavement? Gregor asked, his eyes wide. Why would you wiggle the pavement? Because, my dear Gregor, you simply can't have too much fun with magic, Wobblebottom replied with a dramatic wave of his hand. And besides, it's not just the roads. I'm quite certain we've created a magical spiral. Before he could finish his sentence, the streets of Thistlewood began to vibrate. Not just the pavement, but the trees, the houses, and even the air itself. The vibration grew stronger, causing people to clutch onto whatever they could for dear life, as the entire town seemed to be in motion. Then, with an immense whomp, everything paused. Oliver, Cassandra, and Gregor stood in the middle of the street, trying to catch their breath as a low hum filled the air. The once straight roads had been replaced with gigantic spiraling loops, like a twisted roller coaster that led nowhere and everywhere at once. What? What did we do? Cassandra whispered, fear in her voice. Wobblebottom scratched his chin. Well, this is certainly an interesting development. Interesting? Gregor spluttered. We're stuck on a magical roller coaster. No, 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 Wobblebottom said, eyes widening. This isn't just a roller coaster. This is a spiral vortex. A spiral vortex? Oliver echoed. What does that even mean? It means, Wobblebottom said in a voice that grew more excited, that the very fabric of space and time is bending around the magic we've set in motion. We've opened a portal. A portal? Oliver cried. To where? Wobblebottom paused. Well, to wherever the spiral vortex leads. That's the thing with mischief magic. It doesn't follow conventional rules. It could be anywhere, from the depths of the oceans to the tops of mountains, or somewhere even stranger. But the important thing is, we have to go through it, or the entire town will be sucked into the vortex. I do hope you've been practicing your flying skills. We're going through that? Cassandra said, eyes as wide as saucers. But how? Don't worry, my friends, Wobblebottom said, a gleam of mischief back in his eyes. I've got just the thing. Before they could protest, Wobblebottom pulled out a small, glittering crystal from his robes. With a flick of his wrist, the crystal exploded in a burst of light, and suddenly a sparkling, glowing path formed ahead of them, one that swirled with the same twisted, vibrant colors as the vortex itself. All right, wizards, Wobblebottom said, his voice suddenly full of gravitas. This is your chance to embrace the chaos of magic, and with it, save your town from a very, very weird fate. Without giving them a chance to argue, he jumped forward onto the swirling path, his robes flapping wildly behind him. Oliver, Cassandra, and Gregor exchanged wary glances, but in the end, there was only one choice. They had to follow. With no time to lose, the trio took a deep breath, steadied themselves, and leapt into the unknown. Chapter 6: Through the Spiral Vortex. The moment Oliver's foot touched the glowing path, a strange, exhilarating sensation swept through him. It was as though he were both weightless and heavier than he had ever felt, like he was falling and floating at the same time. The path beneath his feet pulsed, and the air around him vibrated with energy. It was like stepping into a dream, except instead of floating in nothingness, the world around him seemed to ripple and stretch. just like a reflection in a wobbly puddle. Wobble Bottom, where exactly are we going? Cassandra shouted, her voice barely audible over the hum of the vortex. Ah, that's the beauty of it. Wobble Bottom called back, his voice filled with excitement. We're headed to the realm of random, a place where anything is possible. Well, anything that's random, anyway. Random? Gregor asked, sounding suspicious. What do you mean by that? Before Wobblebottom could answer, the world around them seemed to shudder and then snap. With a wild whoosh, they were no longer standing on the glowing path. Instead, they were tumbling through what looked like an enormous cloud of swirling colors: orange, green, purple, and blue, interspersed with bursts of light and shadows. Everything was spinning, and they were floating through it like bits of confetti caught in a whirlwind. Great, Oliver shouted, grabbing onto Cassandra's arm to steady himself. We're in a mood ring or something? A mood ring? Cassandra yelled back, her eyes wide. This doesn't look like anything I've seen in a jewelry store. Just as Oliver was about to ask what was going on, the whirlwind of colors began to slow, and everything went still. In an instant, the world around them stopped spinning, and they found themselves standing on solid ground once more. But this ground was unlike anything they had ever seen. The ground was soft and bouncy, like the surface of a trampoline. Oliver instinctively took a step forward, only to bounce up into the air before crashing back down, much harder than he had anticipated. Whoa, he yelped as he landed with a thud. This place is bouncy. No kidding, Gregor said, bouncing up a few feet before landing with a less than graceful thud. What is this place? Wobblebottom adjusted his hat and squinted around the bizarre landscape. The scenery was, well, utterly chaotic. There were upside-down castles floating in the air, jelly bean-shaped trees growing from giant pots, and the sky above them was an ever-changing kaleidoscope of colors. At the farthest edge of the horizon, what appeared to be a giant rubber duck floated serenely, flapping its wings lazily. This, my friends, is the realm of random, Wobblebottom said proudly. Anything can happen here. That's why we must tread carefully. The laws of logic and reason don't quite work the same here. The key is to embrace the randomness. Embrace the randomness? Oliver echoed, glancing at Cassandra. I don't think that's going to be easy. A loud honking sound interrupted their conversation, and a giant rubber duck waddled past them, its wings flapping in an exaggerated manner. It made a sharp turn and began chasing after a flying pizza box that seemed to have developed a mind of its own. Okay, that isn't random at all, Gregor said, pointing at the duck. That's bizarre. I think that's a good sign, Wobblebottom said, beaming. The more bizarre, the better. It means we're in the right place. Now, if we're to fix the vortex and get back to Thistlewood, we need to find the Whimsy Stone. It's the only way to stop the magic from spiraling out of control. Whimsy Stone? Cassandra raised an eyebrow. And where do we find it? Oh, it's around here somewhere, Wobblebottom said with a wave of his hand. Probably behind a door that leads to a room full of flying spaghetti, or maybe inside a giant snow globe that's actually a pool of chocolate pudding. It's all very random. The trio exchanged looks of disbelief. This is going to be a long day, isn't it? Oliver muttered. But before anyone could respond, a loud pop echoed through the air. A floating door appeared out of nowhere, its wooden frame shimmering in the chaotic light of the realm. It swung open, revealing a room full of balloons. Giant, colorful balloons of every shape and size, floating aimlessly through the air. Well, that's convenient, Gregor said dryly, rubbing his hands together. I'm sure the Whimsy Stone is hiding in there somewhere. We'd better get going, Wobblebottom said. already floating toward the door. And remember, it's all random, so don't think too hard about it. Just let your instincts guide you. Right, Oliver said, taking a deep breath and stepping toward the door. Let's go find a stone inside a room full of balloons. What could possibly go wrong? As they entered the room, the balloons swirled around them, popping and popping with abandon. At first, the room seemed harmless enough, but then they noticed something odd. The balloons didn't just float. They bounced around in strange patterns, and every now and then, one would burst, releasing a puff of confetti or a small puff of smoke. This is way too random, Cassandra said, ducking to avoid a particularly large balloon that shot past her head. I'm starting to think we're not just looking for the whimsy stone, Oliver said, rubbing his temples. We're looking for something else entirely. Well, that much is obvious, Gregor muttered. How do we even find something in a room like this? Just then, the largest balloon of all, shaped like a giant rubber chicken, floated down in front of them, its round eyes blinking as if it had a life of its own. It let out an exaggerated cluck and then released a shower of glittery sparks. Cassandra said. I think that's our clue. Wobblebottom, ever the optimist, clapped his hands together. Exactly. Now let's follow the chicken balloon. And just like that, the trio set off in pursuit of the glittering chicken balloon, each step an adventure as they dove deeper into the strange and chaotic room. They had no idea where the chicken balloon was taking them, but one thing was for sure. The realm of random had only just begun to show them the full extent of its delightful chaos. Chapter 7, The Balloon Chase. The glittering chicken balloon led the trio through the wildly chaotic room. Its plump body floated just out of reach, bobbing and weaving between the other, larger balloons that now surrounded them. Some of the balloons were shaped like everyday objects, a lamp, a toaster, even a tennis racket, while others were far more absurd, an umbrella with a mustache, a flying couch, and a hula-hooping pineapple. This place is a circus, Gregor shouted, barely dodging a giant balloon, shaped like a rubber duck, which honked loudly as it bounced past them. I can't tell if it's magic or just pure chaos, Cassandra said, her voice tinged with both wonder and slight panic as a barrage of balloons swirled overhead. The chicken balloon floated up higher, and the trio leaped to follow it. However, as they leapt, they found that gravity didn't work quite the way it was supposed to in the realm of random. Instead of landing smoothly, they found themselves floating upward, bouncing off the bouncy walls of balloons like rubber balls in an arcade game. Whoa! Oliver yelped, his legs flailing as he ricocheted off a floating waffle-shaped balloon. This is impossible. This is possible, Wobblebottom said, nodding enthusiastically. It's perfectly normal. You just have to go with the flow of randomness. Easy for you to say, Cassandra muttered, catching a nearby balloon to stabilize herself. I'm just trying not to turn into a human popcorn kernel. At that moment, the chicken balloon released a burst of sparkles and veered to the left, narrowly avoiding a giant bouncing jelly bean. With a collective, determined grunt, the trio chased after it, springing off balloons and dodging the occasional flying pizza slice that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Do you think the chicken balloon knows where the whimsy stone is? Oliver asked, a little out of breath as he reached out for the next floating balloon, which was shaped like a giant cupcake. Or is this just randomness? I think it's trying to tell us something, Wobblebottom said, his voice full of excitement. This balloon's got a sense of direction. Believe me, we just have to trust it. Well, I'd trust it more if it didn't just sparkle and release glitter, Gregor said, narrowly avoiding being smacked by a cloud of confetti from a nearby balloon. What's next? Do we have to fight a giant marshmallow? Trust the balloon, Wobblebottom repeated with a grin, clearly caught up in the chaotic fun. Look, it's guiding us. The chicken balloon, apparently growing more sentient by the second, flapped its feathery wings and zipped past a row of bouncing tomatoes before descending toward a bizarre, glowing archway at the far end of the balloon-filled room. I don't like the look of that arch, Cassandra said, squinting at it. That looks awfully purposeful for something in the realm of random. Before she could finish her sentence, the chicken balloon shot through the archway and vanished, leaving only a trail of rainbow-colored feathers in its wake. Without hesitation, the trio followed, bounding through the arch and into what appeared to be an entirely new dimension. For a moment, everything stopped. The balloons, the whimsical chaos, even the laughter of the enchanted rubber chickens, all of it fell silent. The world around them was still. Then it began. A soft humming noise that vibrated through their bones, followed by a low rumble. The ground beneath them shook, and before they could react, a giant pink marshmallow popped out of the ground with an exaggerated boing sound. "Ah, there it is," Wobblebottom exclaimed, pointing at the marshmallow, which had now sprouted arms and was bouncing up and down, seemingly to some invisible rhythm. "That's the guardian of randomness. We have to ask it for permission to proceed." "Ask the marshmallow for permission?" Gregor repeated, his eyes wide. "How does one even ask a marshmallow for permission?" "Just watch me," Wobblebottom said confidently, walking up to the marshmallow and bowing dramatically. "Oh, great and squishy guardian, we humbly ask for passage to the next stage of our journey." The marshmallow stopped bouncing, tilted its head in a highly comical manner, and then, without warning, shot out a stream of pink goo from one of its arms. The goo splattered harmlessly around Wobblebottom, who stood there, unfazed. That means yes. We may proceed," Wobblebottom announced triumphantly, wiping pink goo off his hat. Cassandra and Gregor exchanged a glance, their faces filled with disbelief. "That was easy?" Cassandra said slowly, still processing what had just happened. "I'm beginning to think that everything in this place is a little bit too easy," Gregor replied, his voice tinged with suspicion. "Let's move before the marshmallow changes its mind," Oliver said, already walking forward through the now open path. "We've got a whimsy stone to find." As they continued down the new path, the surroundings grew even more bizarre. The trees they passed were shaped like pencils, and the grass beneath their feet seemed to vibrate with tiny musical notes, as though the ground itself were humming a cheerful tune. The air was filled with the scent of freshly baked cookies, and in the distance, a huge floating teapot poured a river of steaming tea into a cup the size of a house. "This is insane," Gregor muttered. "I don't know what's more terrifying this place, or the fact that it's not even surprising anymore." They finally arrived at a tall stone door, adorned with intricate symbols that seemed to shift and change every time they blinked. At the center of the door was a glowing gemstone that flickered with wild, unpredictable colors. The Whimsy Stone. "It's just behind this door," Wobblebottom said, grinning from ear to ear. "We made it." "Let's just hope it's not as weird as everything else in this place," Cassandra said. Oliver nodded. "At this point, if the Whimsy Stone is a giant floating pancake, I'll consider it normal." With a deep breath, Oliver stepped forward and placed his hand on the door. The symbols on the door flared brightly, and the door creaked open, revealing the chaotic magic of the realm of random waiting to greet them. Chapter 8: The Whimsy Stone's Secret. The door creaked open with a slow, echoing groan, revealing a vast chamber that seemed to stretch on forever. The walls shimmered with countless colors, like a kaleidoscope that was constantly shifting, making it hard to tell where one wall ended and the next began. Giant bubbles floated lazily through the air, popping with a gentle pop every time they touched the ground. In the center of the room, resting on a pedestal made entirely of glittering chocolate bars, was the Whimsy Stone. It was just as they'd imagined, an iridescent gemstone, glowing with a mesmerizing array of rainbow hues. But something about the stone didn't seem quite right. The light it emitted flickered as though it were struggling to stay alight. The ground around it trembled ever so slightly, and the sound of distant laughter echoed through the chamber. Is it just me, or does this place feel wrong? Gregor asked, looking around nervously as a giant inflatable giraffe floated past his head. I was about to ask the same thing, Cassandra replied, her eyes scanning the room. The atmosphere here, it feels like it's about to get a lot crazier. Don't be silly, Wobblebottom said, puffing out his chest. This is the heart of the realm of random. What's the worst that could happen? The moment he spoke, the ground gave a loud boing and launched them all into the air. Gregor, Cassandra, and Wobblebottom tumbled through the chamber like pinballs, bouncing off walls, giant jelly beans, and rubber chickens. When they finally came to a stop, they found themselves in front of the Whimsy Stone. Well, that was something, Cassandra muttered, brushing chocolate and confetti off her clothes. Now, can we get to the not bouncing part? Wobblebottom, ever the optimist, nodded enthusiastically. We just need to approach the Whimsy Stone carefully. It's a tricky one. It's not like your average gemstone. It's a magical artifact with a personality. A personality? Gregor raised an eyebrow. You mean it's alive? Wobblebottom shrugged. More or less. It's a magical being that feeds off randomness. It gets grumpy if you don't play by its rules. That's just great, Gregor muttered. So now we have to appease the stone? Precisely, Wobblebottom said with a grin. Now, watch closely, everyone. The Whimsy Stone loves riddles and jokes. We need to impress it before it lets us use its power. With a deep breath, Wobblebottom stepped forward, cleared his throat, and called out to the Whimsy Stone. Oh, great and whimsical Whimsy Stone, he began with theatrical flair, we come seeking your help. We ask for your guidance, and in exchange, we offer you a joke. There was a brief moment of silence. The stone flickered, its colors changing as if considering Wobblebottom's offer. Then a low rumble filled the room, and the Whimsy Stone spoke, not in words, but in a series of giggles and chuckles that bounced off the walls. Okay, I think we've got its attention, Cassandra said. But what kind of joke are we talking about here? Is it like a knock-knock joke or a riddle? Wobblebottom grinned, stepping up confidently. Oh, I've got just the one. Here goes. He took a deep breath and recited. Why don't skeletons fight each other? Because they don't have the guts. The room fell completely silent. For a moment, it seemed like the Whimsy Stone had grown even dimmer. The ground trembled slightly, as if waiting for a reaction. And then, suddenly, the entire room erupted in laughter. The stone pulsed with bright colors, its glow intensifying as it chuckled in its unique, magical way. The sound was infectious. Soon, Gregor, Cassandra, and even Wobblebottom were laughing along, even though they weren't sure why it was so funny. When the laughter finally subsided, the Whimsy Stone's glow returned to a steady rhythm. It hummed gently, and the chamber began to settle, the walls slowly quieting down. Well, I'll be, Gregor said, still chuckling. I didn't think that would work. Wobblebottom winked. It always works. Laughter is the key to most things in the realm of random. The Whimsy Stone floated up from its pedestal, its light pulsing gently. With a soft whoosh, it zoomed through the air and circled them, as if it were assessing them. Now what? Cassandra asked, raising an eyebrow. Is it going to throw another joke at us? No, Wobblebottom said, eyes twinkling. It's giving us its blessing. The Whimsy Stone is going to help us reverse the spell, but we must complete one more task. We need to find the key of confusion. The key of confusion? Gregor repeated. What? Is it going to be hidden inside a giant puzzle box? Something like that, Wobblebottom said. The key of confusion is located somewhere within the realm of random, but it's never in the same place twice. It changes locations every time someone asks for it. Great, Cassandra muttered, rolling her eyes. More randomness. Why am I not surprised? Wobblebottom was already turning in circles, his arms raised in excitement. Exactly. We've got to follow the signs, trust the clues, and let the randomness guide us. We'll find it in no time. Without waiting for another word, he dashed off into the swirling madness of the chamber, disappearing behind a large floating spoon. I don't know about you, Gregor said to Cassandra, but I'm starting to feel like we're in way over our heads. Cassandra sighed. I think that's the point, Gregor. I think that's the point. Chapter 9, The Key of Confusion. The chamber around them seemed even wilder than before. It was like stepping into the middle of an enchanted circus, where logic had abandoned the premises entirely. Everywhere they looked, something impossible was happening. A giraffe wearing a bow tie floated by, an umbrella turned into a flock of sparrows, and somewhere off in the distance, a giant talking cookie was singing opera. Right. Just another typical day in the realm of random, Gregor muttered, feeling the weight of absurdity press down on him like an invisible, wobbly, bouncy ball. He looked around and spotted Cassandra following Wobblebottom, who was happily bouncing around, ignoring all the chaos. You know, I'm really starting to wonder if we're actually going to find this key of confusion, Cassandra said, a note of doubt in her voice. How do we even look for something that moves on its own? Wobblebottom, who had stopped in front of a floating mirror that reflected only the back of his head, turned around and grinned. We don't look for it. It finds us. We just have to follow the signs. What signs? Gregor asked, his tone skeptical. Just wait for it. Wobblebottom waved his hands in the air like he was conducting an invisible orchestra. The signs are never in the same place, but they're always there. You just have to believe in them. Gregor stared at the ground, hoping for something, anything, to give them a clue. Suddenly, a small piece of paper fluttered by, sticking to his shoe. He bent down to examine it, only to find that it wasn't paper at all. It was a small, floating pancake. Well, that's odd, Gregor said, picking up the pancake and holding it in front of his face. What does this mean? Is this a sign? Cassandra walked over and gave it a quick sniff. I think it means breakfast, she said, half laughing. But this place is making less sense by the minute. No, no. Wobblebottom waved his hands in excitement. That's exactly it. The sign came to us. We've got to follow the pancake. It's leading us to the key of confusion. Is there a specific reason it's a pancake? Gregor asked, scratching his head. Wobblebottom nodded solemnly. Because that's just the way of the realm of random. Now, come on. It's leading us. The pancake hovered in front of them, rotating slightly as if it had a mind of its own. Then, with an almost imperceptible whoosh, it zipped away, floating gently through the air. The trio followed it as it bounced through the bizarre landscape, leading them over a bouncing trampoline bridge, past a river of glittering syrup, and under a rain cloud that showered candy instead of water. Okay, this is officially weird, Gregor muttered, dodging a falling chocolate bar that whizzed past his head. How is a pancake our only clue? But despite his skepticism, the trio continued, chasing the hovering pancake through the madness until they reached the edge of a massive, swirling vortex that appeared to be made entirely of rubber bands. This is it, Wobblebottom said with a grin, his eyes gleaming. The final destination. Gregor peered over the edge, feeling the pull of the vortex. You got to be kidding me. We're supposed to jump into that. Cassandra grabbed his arm and yanked him back. We don't jump into it. We let the vortex bring us. It's part of the test. Just then, the pancake dropped down into the swirling vortex, spinning lazily before disappearing entirely. The group exchanged a nervous glance. Well, here goes nothing, Gregor said with a deep breath. I guess it's better than being stuck on a bouncing rubber ball forever. With no time to second-guess themselves, they all held hands and stepped forward into the vortex. The world spun around them, the colors blending into a dizzying blur. For a moment, it felt like they were plummeting through time itself, each second stretching into an eternity. Then, with a soft thud, they landed with a gentle bounce on a soft surface that felt like rubber, but wasn't. When the spinning stopped, they looked around and found themselves in a completely different place, a vast room filled with giant, swirling gears, ticking clocks, and enchanted books. The floor was made of soft, squishy marshmallows, and the air smelled faintly of vanilla and confusion. I think we've made it, Cassandra said, her voice tinged with awe. But now what? Wobblebottom looked around, his eyes wide. Now, we find the key. The group began to explore the room, looking for any sign of the elusive object. It wasn't long before they spotted a massive, sparkling golden key suspended in midair, surrounded by a halo of shimmering light. That's it, Wobblebottom exclaimed, rushing forward. But before they could reach it, the key began to float higher into the air, just out of their grasp. It danced around them, teasing them with its golden glow. Oh, come on, Gregor shouted, jumping up in an attempt to grab it. Why can't anything be easy? The key wobbled, then suddenly split into a dozen smaller keys, each darting in different directions. They were too fast to catch, each one zipping around the room like a mischievous firefly. We've got to catch them all, Wobblebottom said, rubbing his hands together eagerly. The key of confusion never makes things simple. Gregor and Cassandra exchanged a glance. Well, Gregor said with a grin, I guess we've gotten used to that by now. With that, the three friends set off in pursuit of the floating keys, each one more elusive than the last. As they ran and leaped through the room, dodging gears and bouncing off marshmallow walls, they realized that while the journey might be confusing and unpredictable, they were in this together, and that was enough to keep going. Chapter 10: The Final Bounce. The room was now a blur of frantic motion. Gregor, Cassandra, and Wobblebottom were no longer just chasing keys. They were in the middle of a chase, a dance of utter absurdity. Each key seemed to have a mind of its own, zipping and darting between enchanted gears, over bouncing marshmallow hills, and past enormous grandfather clocks that ticked backward with every. The key of confusion, now in the form of dozens of golden fragments, flashed and whizzed, taunting them with every near miss. Cassandra took a deep breath and pointed toward the far side of the room. There's one, she shouted. Gregor followed her gaze, spotting one of the keys hovering just out of reach near a massive bookcase, its golden sheen dazzling in the dim light. Got it, he shouted and leaped forward, landing on a bouncing cushion just beneath the floating key. He reached up, just barely brushing its surface. A burst of light erupted from the key, and the fragments scattered again, splitting like a firework. The whole room seemed to shake, the gears grinding louder as if protesting their interference. No time to stop, Wobblebottom yelled, darting toward the center of the room where a massive gear turned ominously. We have to find the right one, and fast. As they ran through the chaos, their eyes darting to every corner, they realized something. This was not just about finding the right key. This was a test, a final lesson in what they had learned. We don't chase magic, Cassandra said as she paused, noticing a key slowly descending toward them, its golden glow now soft, almost inviting. It has to come to us. Gregor blinked, his confusion clearing. Wait, are we chasing it because we think we should? Or because we want to? Maybe that's the trick. We have to let it find us, not the other way around. Wobblebottom, who had been bouncing around in circles, stopped midair and floated down next to them. Finally, you're getting it. The key of confusion is all about letting go of control. The keys and a grand display of light suddenly stopped moving. The room quieted for the first time since the chaos began. The golden fragments hung motionless in the air, and then, with a soft hum, they all floated together into one, forming the complete key of confusion. It's done, Wobblebottom whispered. Gregor, Cassandra, and Wobblebottom stepped forward in unison, and as they reached out for the key, the room seemed to hold its breath. They took it in their hands, feeling its warmth, and a sense of peace washed over them, as if they had solved the greatest riddle of all. Now what? Gregor asked, looking around at the room that had been their playground and obstacle course for so long. Wobblebottom smiled, his eyes gleaming with the same mischievous light. Now, we reverse the spell. They turned to face the enormous rubber band vortex that still loomed in the center of the room. The world beyond was still bouncing madly, the town they had known now a giant rubber ball in the distance, careening through space with no clear direction. I guess this is it, Cassandra said, clutching the key of confusion tightly. We're going to make everything right? Wobblebottom nodded, and with one last deep breath, they all held the key high, and as if in response to their resolve, the key began to glow even brighter. With a loud pop, a swirl of golden magic shot out from the key, surrounding them with shimmering light. For a moment, everything went still. The colors, the sounds, and the chaos, they all disappeared in a burst of radiant energy. The trio stood, hand in hand, on solid ground once more. And then, as quickly as it had all begun, they found themselves back in the small, ordinary town they had always known. The streets were calm, the buildings stood still, and the people were going about their day like nothing had ever happened. Did we do it? Gregor asked, looking around in disbelief. Is it over? A soft breeze blew through the town, and Cassandra looked up to see the sky clear, the clouds parting to reveal the sun. I think we did. The world is still here. Wobblebottom laughed, his voice light and carefree. Well, what do you know? The world didn't bounce out of existence after all. We did it. Gregor chuckled, wiping his brow. I'll never look at a rubber ball the same way again. Cassandra grinned. You know, we might have just saved the world by being a little less serious, a little more clumsy. As they stood in the center of the town, a sense of calm settled over them. The magic was gone. The spell was broken. The key of confusion had done its job, and they had found the most important lesson of all. It was the magic of friendship, the magic of being able to laugh in the face of absurdity, of knowing when to let go of control, and of finding joy in the journey, no matter how bumpy or unpredictable it may be. And so, with their adventure behind them and their town safe, they returned to their everyday lives. But from that day forward, they looked at the world just a little differently. Because sometimes the greatest magic of all is just knowing how to bounce back from the unexpected.